Hello friends, welcome to the channel Virtual Learners. We were dealing with the political science optionals. We have completed Plato, the Western philosophical thinker. Now we will move on to Aristotle. Today we will discuss the topics Aristotle, his theory of state, theory of citizenship, theory of slavery, theory of constitutions, theory of property, theory of law, theory of justice, theory of revolution. Aristotle is known as the father of political science. He is also the greatest disciple as well as greatest critic of Plato. Aristotle's book is Politics. The country where we see Aristotle's ideas in practice is Britain. So Aristotle is the father of political science. He was the greatest disciple and greatest critic of Plato. We have seen it in the earlier class. The book is Politics. Let's move on to the Aristotle's theory of state. We will discuss some of the statements by Aristotle. Man is by nature a political animal. One who can live without a state is either beast or god, but can't be a man. State comes into existence for sake and life and continues for sake of good life. State is highest of all associations. State is prior to man. Chronologically, man is prior to state, but logically, state is prior to man. These were the statements provided by Aristotle. When we look at the statements provided by Aristotle, we can see that he gives emphasis to the importance of state. Aristotle belongs to Socrates' tradition of emphasizing the importance of state. He suggests that man requires superhuman qualities to live without a state. For fulfillment of basic needs, man requires family. But whether family is enough? No, family is not enough. So, family cannot fulfill all the needs. Hence, he forms a village. Village also cannot fulfill all the needs. Thus, that is the requirement of forming a state. Thus, only state is capable of fulfillment of all the needs. He suggests that state is the highest of all associations and suggests it is the destiny of man to live under the state. So, what he is emphasizing? The importance of state. He suggests that man requires superhuman qualities to live without a state. So, he belongs to the Socrates tradition of emphasizing the importance of state. So, that is the theory of state by Aristotle. Now let's evaluate a statement by Aristotle. Authority of the state differs from authority of a father. How can you evaluate or how can you explain this statement? Aristotle is a supporter of direct polity. Laws should be result of deliberations by adults in a state. How laws can be formed in a state? It should be as a result of discussion and deliberation by adults in a state. Aristotle is criticizing the Plato's version of state. Plato considers a state as a big family and philosopher king as a father enjoying absolute authority over children. We have seen about the concept of philosopher king by Plato. In this, he has absolute right. So, this absolutism of this monarch or the philosopher king is criticized by Plato in this sentence. Aristotle suggests that there has to be a difference between authority of a father over the children and authority of statesman over the citizens. Here, Aristotle is criticizing Plato over the concept of the absolute nature of philosopher king. How the law should be made in a state? It should be as a result of deliberations by adults in a state. It should not be propagated by a philosopher king or a monarch. That is the meaning of the sentence given. He says that state is not a family but it's family of families. Hence, laws concerning the state should not be dictated by a person but should be result of deliberations among the citizens. So, citizens' participation is important and there should not be any dictatorship by philosopher king or a monarch. So, he is criticizing Plato. Rather than an absolute state, what Aristotle conveys? He says that state should not try to achieve excess unity, rather try to achieve unity in diversity. There should be room for diversity. Aristotle's views are pragmatic, that is practical, in comparison with Plato. Aristotle is the greatest critic of Plato, but Aristotle is actually rectifying the limitations of Plato's ideas. So, Aristotle is criticizing the philosopher king concept by Plato, where philosopher king is an absolute monarch or absolute leader. Now, let's move on to Aristotle's theory of citizenship. Citizenship is the legal status between man and state, where citizens will have certain privileges over state when compared to non-citizens. So, those who are citizens will have certain privileges over state when compared to non-citizens. Aristotle support two universal principles, that is just soli, that is based on the place of birth, and just sanguine, which is based on blood or descent. Aristotle's citizenship is not a legal status, it is duty towards the state. That is, citizens will have a duty or obligation towards the state, and they should be part of the legislative functions. So they should participate in legislative functions and judicial functions also. So it is not merely a legal status, but it is also an obligation or duty, and everybody should participate in the legal or legislative functions and judicial functions. Here citizens only should be participated, that is to be noted. In Aristotle's theory of citizenship, there are many exclusions. That is, Aristotle excludes women, children, old people, slaves from acquiring citizenship. Why? In the case of women, they are absorbed in domestic affairs and cannot contribute meaningfully in public affairs. That is, they are involved in household affairs, so they can't contribute meaningfully in public affairs or state affairs. That is why woman is excluded. Next is children. Why are children excluded? Because they are immature. Next is the old people. Their physical or medical condition prevents them from doing duties efficiently. So they also cannot efficiently contribute to nation building or to the state's affairs. That is why old people is excluded. Next comes the case of slaves. Slaves, they don't have reason. They always depend on master for their survival. So slaves are excluded. Now let's make it clear that who are actually included or qualified for acquiring citizenship. Only men belonging to propertied class can fulfill the obligations of the state. Here, what are the qualities? They are men of reason. They have logic or reason. They can afford to keep slaves because they are masters. They can participate in the affairs of the city-state. They are qualified. That is, the adult male who is having the propertied class can participate in the affairs of the city-state. Even though narrow view, he points out that citizenship is not a formal status, as it is a huge responsibility. It is not a formal legal status. Citizenship is an obligation or a duty towards the state. Now let's move on to the Aristotle's theory of slavery. Slavery was an institution practiced in ancient Greece. Aristotle justified slavery. He was supporting slavery. He says that it is natural and it is useful. There are two types of slaves. Slaves by law, that is, they are prisoners of war. They are taken as prisoners after a war when it is lost. Then they are called prisoners of war. They are slaves by law. Next is slaves by nature. Natural slaves, because they do not have any independent existence. They will exist only when there is a master. That is called slaves by nature, that is natural slaves. In order to understand the slavery concept, we have to assess the qualities of a master. He has reason and courage. So these are the two qualities that dominates in a master, that is reason and courage. According to Aristotle, those who lack reason and courage are slaves by nature. There are two kinds of persons, physically strong and mentally strong. Here, physically strong people should do manual work and mentally strong people should do mental work. So physical labor is done by slaves, and those who work mentally can do the mental work. So here, slaves do the physical work because they have physical strength. So qualities of a master is reason and courage. They dominate in master. Aristotle was suggesting that slavery is useful. How did he establish that slavery is useful? He says that it is useful for political system. Aristotle was saying that it is useful for political system. How? Since slave is working for master, master gets quality time to participate in the affairs of the city-state. So, slaves will help the master, and now master will have time to participate in the affairs of the state meaningfully or effectively. Thus, it is useful for political system. Now again, it is useful for economic system. Since slave is strong, that is physically strong, he can work for long durations. Thus, it is benefit for the master as well as for the economy. Now it is useful for slaves themselves. Why? Slaves can't live without master. In the company of virtuous master, slaves also can develop virtue. Here, master should treat slaves in proper manner. That is what is suggested by Aristotle, because slaves are dependent on masters. Thus, slavery is useful for them, both for their living and to develop virtue. That is the concept of slavery by Aristotle. Aristotle is suggesting theory of slaves. In this, he is emphasizing that Slaves are slaves by nature or natural slaves. Such theories become basis for justifications of myths like white man's burden and civilizing mission. That is, we have seen that British has come to India and they said that their objective is civilizing the uncivilized people in India. So this is actually colonialism and exploitation of the Indian people, but they have suggested in a way that they are civilizing the uncivilized people of India. So our mission was civilizing mission. So these kind of theories, that is Aristotle's theory of slavery, has been a contribution to develop myths like white man's burden or civilizing mission, etc. Next is Aristotle's theory of property. He suggests not to establish the institution of property as it has positive effects and advocates for reform of the institution. Earlier Plato was saying about the negative effects or ill effects of property. Now Aristotle is saying that it has positive effects and it should not be abolished. There are three systems: common ownership and common use, common ownership and individual use, individual ownership and common use. Now what is better? Here Aristotle advocates for individual ownership and common use of property as it will be more productive and beneficiary. Thus Aristotle advocates for individual ownership and common use of property. Here we can see the earliest idea of trusteeship in his theory. Now let's move on to Aristotle's theory of justice. According to Aristotle's principle of justice, it is based on idea of proportion. His theory is known as theory of proportionate justice. What is his theory called? Theory of proportionate justice. There are two types. A, proportionate justice in rectification. Justice in rectification. If a grievance is there, it has to be redressed according to the proportion of harm done. So that is proportionate justice in rectification. Now next is proportionate justice in distributive phase. In this, according to Aristotle, who should get what should depend on importance of person's contribution to society. If a person is contributing more, he should get reward more. So we can see that Aristotle supports the distribution of rewards on the basis of merit. So he wants to build a meritocracy or meritocratic society. In Aristotle's theory of justice, he says that, he quotes that it is unjust to treat equals unequally, but it is equally unjust to treat unequals equally. Meaning, it would be unjust if we treat two persons with equal merit differentially. Also, he makes a point that it is unjust if we give equal rewards to two persons who are unequal in terms of their merit. That is, two persons who are unequal in merit should not be rewarded equally. So that is the meaning of the statement given. Next, we will move on to Aristotle's theory of constitution. According to Aristotle, government should be accordance to the constitution. He has analyzed 158 constitutions. He classified constitution into two types. One is normal, the other one is perverted or diseased. In normal, ruling class rules in the interest of the people. In perverted or diseased constitution or government, ruling class rules in the self-interest. So that is the difference between normal and perverted constitutions. Aristotle says that polity is the best practicable form of government. He conveys that polity is the role of middle class. So, role of middle class according to Aristotle is the best form of government. Democracy is the role of ignorant poor. He says that democracy is the role of ignorant people or ignorant poor in the economy. Aristotle says that rule of philosopher king is the best form of government. But what is the problem? It is unachievable because it is an utopian concept. Philosopher king concept is put forward by Plato. He says that philosopher should be the ruler or the king. But what is the problem? It may lead to tyranny, and tyranny is the worst form of government. That is why Aristotle is not suggesting philosopher king, the role of the philosopher king. Here he suggests that polity is the golden mean of oligarchy. What is the meaning of the statement? Here oligarchy is the rule of few persons in the self-interest. That is oligarchy. And what is democracy? Democracy is the role of many ignorant poor. According to Aristotle, democracy is the role of many ignorant poor. Polity is the role of middle class in the interest of the people. And that is the middle path that he is choosing. So he takes the middle path as moderation and he says that it is the best way of life. It is called the golden mean concept. That is, he is not choosing for oligarchy and not for democracy. He is taking a middle path. That is the role of the polity. He is suggesting the role of polity and that is called the middle path. And here That concept is stated as golden mean concept. Here Aristotle is saying that both rich and poor tends to commit crime. One because of arrogance, that is the rich is committing the crime because of arrogance and the poor is committing the crime because of ignorance. Here rich does not trust the poor and poor does not trust the rich. Here there will be more conspiracies because rich does not trust the poor and poor does not trust the rich. Both of these sections trust the middle class. Hence rule of middle class will be stable. How Aristotle considers that middle class rule will be stable? Here rule of the middle class will be stable because the rich and the poor trust the middle class equally. So there will be more stability in the rule. Thus Aristotle suggests that polity is the best practical form of government. That is why Aristotle is suggesting that polity, the rule of the middle class, is the best practical form of government. Now let's move on to Aristotle's theory of law. In this, he states that a law is a reason without passion. Aristotle does not support the idea of giving absolute powers to philosopher king, as the concept is utopian. We have discussed earlier in Plato that philosopher king is the concept of Plato, suggesting a king of the state should be a philosopher. Here the ultimate authority or the absolute powers are given to the philosopher king. Aristotle is criticizing Plato and he is not in the opinion that philosopher should be the king and absolute right should not be given to philosopher king. Here according to Aristotle, he conveys that rule of law is the best practicable form. Here law is reason minus passion. Aristotle is a critic of Plato's idea of philosopher king and he gives importance to rule of law. There are three advantages of rule of law. One is rule of law is impersonal, that is it is not having any bias. Law represents the collective wisdom of ages, which is more dependable because it is better than the wisdom of a single person or a monarch. Third one, it has additional safeguards and benefits because it is not acting as the arbitrary will of any leader. These are the advantages of rule of law. Now let's move on to Aristotle's theory of revolution. What is the conventional understanding of revolution? It is associated with scholar Karl Marx, who describes revolution as total, sudden, violent overthrow of the system. So, revolution according to Karl Marx is total, sudden, violent overthrow of the system, existing system. Aristotle's revolution is any change, big or small, violent or peaceful change in form of government, change in number of persons ruling, etc. Aristotle put forward many causes of revolution. What are the causes of revolution? It is corruption. Again, it is social imbalance, sudden influx of foreigners. If state rewards who does not deserve, then also it causes a revolution. If state does not reward those who deserve, then it leads to revolution. He suggests that change is natural and revolution therefore is inevitable. So these are the causes which he suggests which leads to revolution. Aristotle is regarded as father of political science. Let's evaluate this statement. He uses scientific approach in his theories. That is, Aristotle uses scientific approach in his theories. Plato's book is encyclopedic in nature, whereas Aristotle's politics entirely deals with study of constitutions. He has studied 158 constitutions. He deploys inductive approach using experiments to reach a conclusion. What is inductive approach? It is using experiments to reach a generalized conclusion. He is father of constitutionalism and rule of law. So these are the points which can build this answer. That is how he is regarded as father of political science. That's all for today. Please subscribe the channel for more videos.